ready to have your mind blown. Today we're diving deep into something pretty amazing, evolution. But not just the textbook stuff. We're going for the big picture stuff, the philosophical, the almost poetic side of it. And we've got a great guide for this.
Yeah, we're talking about Richard Dawkins, a biologist. Some people even call him Darwin's Rottweiler because he's out there fiercely defending evolution.
Right, he doesn't just explain the science, but really makes you think about, what it means for us humans, for understanding ourselves.
Exactly. And our source for this deep dive is a conversation he had with Neil deGrasse Tyson, the astrophysicist, on StarTalk. It's a really cool interview.
So get ready for some wild ideas, things that might seem kind of dangerous at first, but ultimately, reveal this deeper beauty in nature. It all starts with this phrase, Darwin's dangerous idea. Have you heard that one before?
Yeah, it comes from the philosopher Daniel Dennett. He calls evolution by natural selection the greatest idea anyone's ever had. And it kind of is because it explains how all this complexity of life just happened, not from design, but from this basic process.
But if it's so basic, why did it take us humans so long to figure it out? Shouldn't some genius have thought of this way earlier?
Well, funny you should mention that because it seems like for centuries, we were kind of stuck in our own way of thinking. Back in the day, people like Aristotle had this idea called essentialism.
Essentialism.
Yeah, it's like they thought every species, every living thing has this fixed essence that they can't really change. It's like thinking a dog will always be a dog no matter what. And that messed up how we saw life, how it could change over a long, long time.
So we're kind of like those old-timey astronomers, right?
Yep.
The ones who thought everything had to move in perfect circles.
Exactly. And it makes you think, right? What assumptions do we have now that might be blinding us, that might be keeping us from seeing the world how it really is?
Pretty deep stuff. So this dangerous idea, it shakes things up, right? And it leads to one of Dawkins' most famous and, let's be honest, controversial ideas, the whole selfish gene thing.
Right. The idea here is it's not really us, the organisms, that are running the show. It's the genes, those tiny bits of information that get passed down through generations. They're like the real players, and we're just like vehicles for them, survival machines built to help the genes keep going.
He even compares us to, get this, darkened vessels of anaerobic fecal matter.
Yeah, not very flattering, is it, from the perspective of our gut bacteria?
Not at all. But it shows how we might not even realize what's really driving our actions, right?
For sure. And then there's this other wild thing. Dawkins went and stored his whole genome, like his genetic blueprint, on a disk.
Like a digital backup.
Pretty much. And it makes you wonder, right? What if someday biology becomes, obsolete? Could we just exist as information, pure data?
It's like something out of science fiction. And guess what? That disk is locked away in a vault to be dug up in 1,000 years.
Wonder what they'll think 1,000 years from now.
Right, like how our understanding of life will have changed. Okay, so we've got this dangerous idea with these selfish genes driving things. But there's another thing people get wrong about evolution, right? They think of it as this big, dramatic, almost magical process.
Yeah, like creatures just suddenly transforming into something new, right?
Exactly. But it's not like that at all.
Nah, it's actually super slow. Tiny changes adding up over tons and tons of generations.
So what about that classic question? Which came first, the chicken or the egg?
Well, the egg did, but here's the thing. The bird that laid it wasn't quite a chicken yet.
Whoa.
It's crazy to think about. Imagine if you could walk past millions of generations of your own ancestors all lined up. You'd see these super gradual shifts, so tiny you might not even notice at first. But eventually you'd get to, fish.
Whoa, yeah. It's like one of those time-lapse videos, right? You see a flower going from seed to bloom, but you don't see each tiny change.
Exactly. And speaking of seeing the end result but not the process, Dawkins uses this awesome analogy. It's about how complexity can happen without a designer. He calls it the blind watchmaker.
The blind watchmaker.
Yeah, he's tackling this old argument, the one that says God must exist because look at how complex living things are. Just like a watch needs a watchmaker, right? That's the idea.
Right, yeah, I like that one.
But Dawkins says, hold on, there's another way. He says natural selection is like this blind watchmaker. It's not conscious, it doesn't have a plan, but it still creates all this amazing diversity and complexity we see in life just by favoring those tiny changes that happen to help an organism survive or have more babies.
So it's not just random chance.
No, it's a filter. Those small variations that give an advantage, those are the ones that get passed on. He uses the eye as an example.
An eye.
Yeah, it didn't just pop into existence, perfect from the start. It was this series of tiny steps, each one building on the one before. Starting from like a simple light-sensitive patch and ending up with the incredible eye we have today.
Makes you wonder what other senses could be out there.
Right. And Neil deGrasse Tyson even brings up this point about the electromagnetic spectrum. All those different kinds of light. We see such a tiny sliver of it.
Like, what if we could see radio waves?
Right. Yeah, imagine that. The world would look completely different.
It's crazy. Makes you think about how much we might be missing. And speaking of how information gets cast on, there's another big idea Dawkins came up with. The meme.
Now, before you think about funny cat pictures online,
Right.
the kind of meme Dawkins is talking about is much broader. It's anything cultural that spreads from person to person, an idea, a behavior, a fashion, anything like that.
So like a catchy tune or a new dance everyone's doing, those are memes.
Exactly. And they're like genes in a way. The ones that spread easily and stick around, those are the successful ones.
Like those stories, right? The ones about alligators living in the New York City sewers.
Yeah.
Whether it's true or not, the story's been around forever.
Yeah, that shows it's a strong meme. And it's funny, right, how the word meme itself has kind of evolved. It means something different now than what Dawkins meant.
Yeah, but the basic idea is still there.
Yeah.
Even Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about this badass meme of him that went viral. It shows how these cultural things take on a life of their own.
Totally. But Dawkins, he doesn't stop there. He also talks about this relationship between science and poetry, He uses this phrase, unweaving the rainbow.
Unweaving the rainbow. I like that.
It's from this poet, John Keats. He was sad that Newton, the scientist, had explained rainbows. He thought it took away the mystery, the beauty. But Dawkins, he sees it differently.
So knowing how something works doesn't have to ruin it.
Exactly. Dawkins says understanding science can actually make things even more beautiful. Like when you peel back the layers and see how something actually works, it makes you appreciate it even more.
Tyson tells this great story about that double rainbow guy video that went viral. The guy's crying because he's so moved by this double rainbow.
Right. Even though we know how rainbows work, they can still be amazing to see.
Makes you think, right? Does knowing how something works kill the magic? Or does it make it even more magical? Like, could science itself be a kind of poetry? A way to see the beauty hidden in the universe?
That's a great question. And it takes us to two of Dawkins' books. They really dig into these ideas, The Ancestor's Tale and The Genetic Book of the Dead.
I love those titles.
Right. They both kind of take you on this journey through the history of life, but not in the usual way.
How so?
Well, they emphasize this point, that humans, we're not the end goal of evolution. We're just one branch on this huge tree of life.
We're not the center of it all.
Right. The Ancestor's Tale is even written like this old story, the Canterbury Tales. It's like a pilgrimage going back in time, meeting all our evolutionary cousins along the way.
Sounds cool.
Yeah, and the Genetic Book of the Dead, it dives into how our bodies, right down to our genes, they hold all this information about the past.
Like, our DNA is a history book.
Yeah, pretty much. Like a desert lizard's camouflage. It tells you something about where its ancestors lived.
Right.
Even things that seem useless, like your pinky toe.
Well, my pinky toe has a story.
Maybe. Who knows what advantage it might have given your ancestors,
It's wild to think about. We're like walking museums, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we only exist because so many others didn't make it.
Yeah, billions of deaths, each one shaping life as we know it. Makes you appreciate it all, doesn't it?
It does, but also makes you think, what about hope? Like, if evolution is this blind process, can we even hope for humanity's future?
That's a big question, and Dawkins wrestles with it. He's honest about the challenges, but he also chooses to live as though he has hope.
So he's not giving up.
Not at all. And Tyson adds to that. He thinks maybe it's about how we talk about science, Maybe that can inspire hope and get people doing good things in the world.
So it's not just about knowing the science, but how we share it.
Exactly. It leaves us with this big question. How do we balance seeing the world for what it is with still working to make it better? So we're back, diving deeper into the ideas of Richard Dawkins.
Yeah, and we've covered a lot of ground already, haven't we? Like the whole idea of evolution by natural selection, these kind of crazy concepts like the selfish gene and the blind watchmaker.
It's amazing how Dawkins can make these complicated ideas not just like understandable, but also really make you think. And his conversation with Neil deGrasse Tyson, it's just brilliant. They really get into it.
Yeah, and speaking of thought-provoking stuff, last time we were talking about hope, right? Like, how can you be optimistic when you look at the world through Dawkins' lens.
It's a tough one, right? Because on the one hand, Dawkins is very clear-eyed about the challenges we face as a species. Like, he doesn't sugarcoat things. But then he says he chooses to live as though he has hope, almost like a practical choice.
It's like he's saying, look, the world's a mess, but I'm going to act like I can make a difference anyway.
Right, and that leads to this other point they bring up about different ways to communicate science. Dawkins is known for being very direct, even confrontational sometimes.
Yeah, he doesn't hold back.
But Tyson, he's more about inspiring awe and wonder. It's like two different approaches, and maybe we need both.
For sure, you need people who are willing to shake things up, and you need people who can make science exciting and accessible. Like, it takes all kinds.
Exactly. But even if you don't agree with everything Dawkins says, he does make you think. Like his book, The God Delusion.
Oh yeah, that one definitely caused a stir. I mean, it put him right up there with the four horsemen of atheism.
Yeah. The God Delusion is a pretty strong critique of religion. Dawkins argues that belief in God is not only, like, unnecessary, but it can actually be harmful.
It's not an easy read, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But it forces you to examine your own beliefs, to think about the role of religion in society.
And at its core, it's about this emphasis on evidence-based thinking, right? Questioning your assumptions, demanding proof, being willing to change your mind.
That's what science is all about, right? Always testing, always questioning. But for now, let's step back from the philosophy and go back to this amazing idea, the genetic book of the dead. It's such a powerful image.
Yeah, the idea that our bodies, our very DNA, holds a record of everything our ancestors went through.
Like their struggles, their adaptations, all of it.
Exactly. And it's not just the obvious stuff like a desert lizard's camouflage. Dawkins says even seemingly small, insignificant traits, they might have a story to tell.
Like, what about my pinky toe? What's its story?
Who knows? Maybe it gave your ancestors some kind of advantage way back when. We're carrying around all these echoes of the past, even in our smallest features.
Makes you realize we're only here because countless others weren't, right? All those who didn't have the right traits to survive.
Yeah, billions of deaths shaping the tree of life. Kind of makes you feel small, doesn't it? But also connected to this vast history.
And it makes you wonder, right? With all this new gene editing technology, are we about to start rewriting that book? Like, take control of our own evolution?
That's a huge question with huge consequences.
Yeah.
And it brings us back to that tension between Dawkins' worldview and hope, right? Like, can you acknowledge the harsh realities and still believe in a better future?
It's a tough one. Dawkins seems to say, you got to find a way, like face the darkness, but act as if there's light ahead.
And Tyson suggests maybe we can inspire hope by showing the beauty of science, Maybe that can motivate people to make the world a better place.
So where does that leave us? How do we find that balance between seeing the world clearly and still working to improve it? Well, here we are, back again for the final part of our Richard Dawkins deep dive.
It's been a wild ride, hasn't it? Exploring these, massive ideas about evolution, the universe, even the meaning of life.
Dawkins really makes you think, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the most important things I've taken from all this is how he pushes us to see the world differently. Like to question everything, to not be afraid of the big questions, even when the answers are kind of unsettling.
Yeah, and what I love about this interview with Neil deGrasse Tyson is how Dawkins brings all these different things together. Biology, philosophy, history, even poetry.
Right, it's like he's unlocked this secret code, the genetic book of the dead, that's hidden inside all of us.
He's showing us these amazing stories written in our DNA about where we come from, how life itself has changed and adapted over millions of years.
And that brings us to our final point for today, this idea of the surprising poetry of evolution. Sounds kind of weird, right?
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When you think about evolution, you usually picture this fierce struggle for survival, right? All about competition, being ruthless. Where's the poetry in that?
Yeah, it doesn't sound very romantic.
But Dawkins says, knowing the science behind it, understanding how it all works, doesn't make it less beautiful. In fact, it can make it even more amazing.
It's like when you watch a sunset, right?
Yeah.
It's beautiful no matter what. But knowing the physics behind it, how the light scatters through the atmosphere, it just adds another layer.
Exactly. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, You see how intricate it is, how everything fits together, and that can actually make it even more awe-inspiring.
It's like knowledge doesn't kill the magic. It just shows you a different kind of magic, right? A deeper kind.
Exactly. And that's what I love about Dawkins. He pushes us to look beyond the surface, to keep asking questions, and to find beauty in unexpected places, even in things like evolution.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what can our listeners take away from all this?
Well, I think the biggest thing is to stay curious, to keep that sense of wonder alive.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to ask the tough questions, to challenge the way things are, to keep learning and exploring.
And remember, like Dawkins says, knowing how something works doesn't have to ruin it. Sometimes it can make it even more incredible. Like the more you learn about the universe, the more amazing it becomes.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. Think about some small, seemingly random trait you have. Your eye color, the shape of your ears, anything like that.
Even something as weird as like a double-jointed thumb.
Right. Exactly. Now ask yourself, what's the story behind that trait? What might it tell you about your ancestors? What challenges did they face? What helped them survive? And how did that lead to you sitting here today?
It's like we're all carrying these hidden stories inside us, waiting to be discovered. So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep uncovering the surprising poetry of evolution. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.